Hey guys, welcome to another BMP video here showing you some more stuff about our rental carts. We have here the teardown process of a Honda GX270 with a 2-to-1 gear reduction gearbox on it. These are the engines that we use for our rental carts. Isaac has the motor off the Go Kart and it's now on the workbench. All the throttle cable, carburetor, exhaust has already been removed. Isaac's taking apart the gearbox portion of it. It's always nice to kind of pull it off the side of the workbench. There's always going to be a little bit of oil left in it even after you drain it. Pop the outside cover off here in just a second. This is the first time we've rebuilt these engines in roughly about 26, 27 months. We've been kind of going through all of them. I think we're on about 10 or 12 at this point. So the gaskets are nice, rock hard on the side covers and clutch side covers here. So everything's a little bit stiff to come off. When they come off, they usually break apart. As you can see, he's kind of pulling it apart there. The gasket, that is. Most of the internal parts, I should say about a 50-50 we will use again, and obviously the consumables will throw away and replace with new as part of the rebuild process. So once he gets the cover off, the clutch system, it's a wet bath clutch, friction disc, floaters, the pressure plate, we take that off all as one unit and then give it all a good wash and a good cleaning afterwards. As you can see there, the gear and chain come off. It's easy just to kind of keep it as one piece. You can put it back or take it apart to clean it and put it back together pretty easily as well. But we like to take it off in one piece, just less pieces to keep track of in the process. So remove the inner washer and the keyway, as well as the hub for the clutch. 4 bolts take the inside housing off, again, which is just a seal. They keep the oil inside from escaping out the center there. Every now and then we do have a seal go bad. You do have to take all this back apart to get to one of those seals. Outside one obviously is just the outside cover, but if it's an inside one, then you got to take it all apart, take it all the way off the engine block, and take it and replace it. Isaac's going to take off the side cover here again. As you can tell, they get pretty dirty. So, you get a little bit of extra oil that runs over a little bit, and little off-track excursions from people being a little bit too wild out there sometimes. Everything gets pretty dirty underneath all those covers. All the dirt and dust gets trapped, any moisture, all that comes off. So after a good wash. Side cover comes off. Now we've gotten into the internal part of the engine. Here we'll take off some of the shielding on the outside. On the internals, we will throw away the rod, piston, rings, lifters. We'll keep the crankshaft as long as it's still relatively in tolerance. We usually have about a 1.5-2,000 tolerance as far as out of round. The cranks and the crank will eventually egg shape itself. All cranks will do that at some point. So as you can see there, he takes out the lifters. We'll replace the lifters. We probably could reuse them, but again, for the cost of the part at that point, it's just as easy to put new ones in. The cam we replace or keep and reuse. We have found that whenever you take it apart and you clean it, you have to re-lubricate the spring and the compression release mechanism. If you don't, it'll end up getting stuck, and then within a couple pulls of restarting the engine later, the cam release, the compression release will fail and be stuck in one position and won't actually work properly, which then whenever you go to pull it, it'll rip the rope right back out of your hand later on. So it's pretty important that after you remove the oil from it, that you immediately put more oil back on it seems counterproductive, but clean, fresh oil, you put it back on everything. Anything that's moving on that cam, you need to re-oil. We've kind of found a direct correlation to new parts right out of the bag, not oiled well. Everything's coated so that it doesn't rust when it comes, but pretty important to do that. So at this point, he's taken off the bottom rod cap. Again, we replaced the rod, piston assembly, ring assembly. To get the head process started, to remove the head, take off the valve cover first. We've learned this trick as well. And the spark plug, a standard spark plug socket, will then fit. If you try to do it with the valve cover still on, it does not fit properly, and it becomes a potential to strip the threads out of the head when you're taking it off, because it's not 100% straight, and you will eventually damage those threads to a point where you need to retap it, or the head's no good, or a helicoil is needed at that point. So we've got the spark plug off, the valve cover off, the gasket for the valve cover. Isaac's going to take off the two nuts that hold the rocker arm on. Each rocker has two nuts. One is kind of like an acorn or a pivot nut, kind of, that recesses down into the rocker arm. The other is the locking nut on the top of the stud on the plate that helps set your valve lash in the process. And that's a very fine threaded nut. Not sure of the thread, it's probably like a 0.6 or 0.7 thread. So it's pretty fine, so that you can make very, very, very fine adjustments for your valve lash, which again will be in the rebuild process. All these parts here, nuts, we just reuse again. If for some reason they look a little bit tired, and really there's no reason for them to be tired, they're just nuts that hold things on, we'll reuse those. Inside the head, valves, valve springs, there's a spring keeper retainer clip on the top. If I have those in stock, we'll put new ones in. If not, we'll replace them. There's a little washer down on one of the valve seats that kind of helps hold the valve spring in place. That we reuse, or again, if we have them in stock, we'll put a new one in. But definitely the head we reuse, and then after that, pretty much everything in the head gets replaced. Isaac is going to attempt here to get the head off with just a standard socket. It's a 14 millimeter bolt. Isaac's a pretty strong guy here, but like I mentioned before, these are 2.5-year-old engines that have not been taken apart, so they are well seasoned and stuck together. So he finally breaks one loose, moving to the next one, going to struggle here. Eventually a breaker bar will be needed to get these bolts off. They are extremely tight. If you look at Honda spec, it's around 75 on the torque wrench, so a lot of pressure there. The gasket's pretty well stuck in there. Gets out the big impact here to take them off. Obviously, putting them together, you want to be a little bit more precise than an impact, but at this point, even the impact isn't cutting it. Eventually, you're going to get the breaker bar out here in a second, but they're on there pretty good. So, on the head, what we'll do is we'll replace valve springs, valves, like I said, for new valves, and we'll kind of go into this a little bit later on as well. We re-lap them, so you get your lapping compound out, clean up the head, get all the carbon off that you can, get your lapping compound back on your valves, get your little squeegee there, I don't know what you call it, but the valve lapping tool, and you spin them around, you seat them back in, you clean it up, and then you got fresh seated valves and seats on your head. Put new valve springs in, and away you go. So, but we'll cover that again a little bit later when we do a rebuild part instead of a teardown. So Isaac's still working on these 4 bolts. 4 bolts hold the head on, that's it. Big strong guy Isaac still can't get that last bolt, so pretty soon here he's going to get tired, a little worn out. Think I can do it? No, I can't do it. Alright, where's this other piece at? What am I looking for? Ah, perfect, found it. Let me get this used go-kart axle here, stick it on the end of the wrench, hold it in place, and with barely any effort it breaks loose. Pretty simple once you get the right tools, and it comes right off almost with no effort at all. At this point it's fine to take your impact, buzz those bolts out. They're a little bit long, about 3.5, 4 inches long. Kind of hard to get out on the inside ones. The top ones are easy. They're right there on the exterior, and these ones you kind of got to fish out there with 2 fingers. Can't quite get in there and pinch it apart. And everyone has a different process too. You don't necessarily have to do it in this exact order. Nothing wrong with any particular way of doing it. Just one person's way over another. Like I said, nothing specific. There's no wrong way or right way to take one apart. The end goal is to have a bare block that you can clean and put new parts in and get ready to rebuild it. So we got all the head bolts out. Again, just like the other gaskets, a little bit tough, a little bit hard, been stuck in there for a while. The side cover has 2 dowel pins that help you line up everything to make sure everything's lined back up. The head has the same thing in the top 2 bolt holes. There's 2 pins. They're roughly about, I'd say probably about 5/8 in diameter. I'm sure there's a metric number for it, but plenty of space there to put it back down in there. Head gasket comes off. Right here, Isaac's taking the valve springs off. There's those 2 keepers on the top. You compress the spring, push it around the end of the valve spring or the valve, and it comes right off. And then as you see here, he's getting these other 2 little parts out. The valve spring's already on the bench there. This is that little washer that sitting down. I can't remember if it's intake or exhaust, but it's sitting down there just kind of helps seat the valve spring, keep it centered and straight whenever it goes in. I think it's on the intake. On the exhaust, I believe there's an actual gasket-like retainer that goes in there. So at this point, head's off. Piston can now come out the top. The crank is still in the bottom, so it's kind of hard to pull the piston assembly out the bottom with the crank still in the way. So head gasket comes out there. Throw that away. New head gasket will be next, or in the rebuild process. Roll the piston around to the top and push it right out, and away it comes. What we're finding after all these years of use, probably close to 300, 350 running hours on all these engines. All they need is a light hone with a ball hone, and they're pretty good to go. Every now and then we get one that's a little bit more worn out than the others. Usually that's from some other failure that has happened, whether we had a crank failure or a rod failure, which then caused a little bit too much play in the piston up top, which is where we normally see most of the problem. Here we're going to remove the flywheel, put the nut back on, use a steel hammer. Do not hit the end of the crank. When you hit the end of the crank bare, you're going to definitely mess up the end of the crank and the threads. So you put your nut back on after you've gotten everything back off. Screw it in about halfway, 3/4 of the way, not to where the threads are going to show, but you want to make sure you hit the nut. And when you hit the nut, you'll jar the taper loose from the crank to the flywheel. But it's a lot easier to throw away that nut and replace the nut than it is to replace a $150 or so crank that currently is a little bit difficult to find if you're lucky to get one. So here we're taking off the ignition coil. These come standard with a internal coil, which is used for the automatic shutdown features that some rental carts operate with. It's a feature that we do not have. We don't run it, so at this point we're removing it. Just it's one less piece to have to worry about putting back on or breaking or coming loose. At this point you have a ready to clean disassembled engine. The governor we do not use for our rental cart program. We gear them properly to run at the right RPM. So at this stage, we go ahead and remove the governor arm, which inside, whenever it's running properly, the side cover has a gear that comes out, hits that arm, pulls the arm back, which then reduces the throttle shaft position, slowing down the engine. So what we do is we take that whole mechanism out. It's one bolt, a pin, and the arm, and you see Isaac's pulling that arm out right there, and then pull the pin, and then the arm internally just comes out the bottom. And what we do here is we just tap and thread and put a bolt in the top to stop any oil from getting out. And that's the whole process of tearing down a Honda 270 with a gearbox for our rental carts. And after this, what we do is we give them a good bath. They clean up, get really clean. Takes about 45 minutes to clean it the proper way, fully. And in the next video, we'll show you putting one back together after we get it all cleaned up and ready to go. So make sure you like, subscribe, check us out for other cool videos. Most of them are racing related. So just check us out and see what you can find and see what you like. We'll see you on the next one.